Hello, everyone. Thank you, John, and thank you, everyone, for the presentation. So today here, I'm going to speak specifically about the Quebec case, since Quebec, as is in Canada, but has its own system city, and as you'll see, a really interesting mix of everything we've seen. So today, I'm going to talk a bit about the construction industry in Quebec and its city. Afterwards, what we found in the research, and specifically, and afterwards, if we can discuss about all of these differences. So the Quebec construction in Quebec represents, as in other places, a really high employment industry with a lot of jobs, a lot of working in it, and also creates a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, as John has specified before. So here, what we were looking at with Quebec is how does it work in a system where we have a lot of institutional mechanisms compared to the rest of North America, and how does can our how is how are sorry how how are these levers used or not? So we've talked with union representative in Quebec, and we've been able to get a lot of interviews and even visiting a training center. Just to clarify, in Quebec, membership is mandatory to access construction. So workers have to be unionized in order to get a job, and they have a choice to join one of 5 unions, 2 of which are trade organized and 3 are organized by industry. So we have many trades represented under one big confederation, construction confederation. So we don't have non-union work within the construction industry, which is under one law, the R20 law. So we have some construction being done outside the R20 law, and a bit of a different regulation, but within the specific sectors of residential sector, institutional and commercial sector, civil engineering and roads, and we have all the industrial work being done in one other sector. And each of these sector has its own collective agreement, something that all the unions have to negotiate together within each sector in order to be able to get to an agreement with the employer's representative, who are also organized in employers associations. So we have a really tightly controlled labor market, and we have the CCQ, which is a Quebec Construction Commission, which is a technically independent organization that regroups people from and within employer association. They regroup them within committees where they can have discussions about different issues and different subjects. And training development is one of those subjects where trade has its own training committee, trades and sectors. So here, in total, we have 25 trades, and it has its own specific certification in Quebec. So even if the red seal exists and workers are able to get the red seal, really few trades actually use the red seal certification and the Quebec certification, which is a specific mandatory certification, whereas the red seal is not mandatory and rarely used by most trades. And training is done in public centers. So I'm just going to put this is a really simple, but really complete, actually. I will defend it. A really complete resume of the construction system. So we have a public training system because in Quebec, the training system is joined under the public training system within high schools. So it isn't professional centered, and they are publicly funded and partially funded by employers also. And these centers are not under trades compared to a lot of other presentations that we had earlier, whereas training is really under the trades responsibility. Here we have the trades involved at the higher level within the committees, help determine what are the useful skills to develop, but they're not responsible directly on the day-to-day, on the hiring, on elements. Therefore, they have way less control and more indirect control on what is being done with the training specifically. And with the little arrow, you can see the unions, and that's where we were able to. Is everything okay? Does it work now?
Not yet.
Is it okay now?
It works. Thanks.
Oh, great. Thank you. So now you can see my really simple diagram. That's great. So, yeah. So here the training is done. So as I was saying, the trades are really involved at a more indirect level. Same thing for employers. They're more involved at the indirect level for the initial training. Then afterwards, pre-apprentice, then they can access. We don't have technically without training. Now we have some changes with the labor shortage, with a lot of accelerated training for specific occupations and trades. But some will have all the time. They don't. There isn't this option of going. So they all have to go through then access the work sites. And then once this training is done, there is the option of continuous education. And for continuous education, we have to have continuous education that is done by free. So we have the one done directly by the employer, have to train the workers on a specific project. Then we have the union training, which is the less frequent in Quebec, because in Quebec, the unions do not have the control over the training. Therefore, they don't have training centers except for one local union, which has own training center, but it's the only one, and it's a recent one. It's been built in the last years. Other trades follow up, and it requires a lot of funding, whereas the employers have access to a public fund, a common fund for the training of their employees. The unions don't have access to the same fund to train their own members. They have to train all the members independently if they want to use it, so it wouldn't work, so they don't have access. And of course, the most common is the continuous education program, also determined at the central level, the tripartite committees with union representative and and employer representatives. And then there is an annual course offer that evolves. Just a small parenthesis, a lot more training get into these every year since the project has begun. I've seen a lot of changes of introducing a lot of courses on green buildings and more sustainable buildings and codes. So here what we found, when we interviewed all of the union representative, we've looked at the trades, what is being done in climate literacy. We've looked at the curriculum and initial training. We've looked at continuous education on the union level and on the sectoral level. Is everything okay on the technical matter? Yeah. Okay. So we found that basically we have this huge machine that has the immense potential of training, but it's moving way too slowly. The new programs, the new technologies are not getting introduced within the system because it takes about 10 years to update the programs because it's all in the public system and it has to go through long processes. So we see a lot of limitations by these actually really intense and tightly wound up structures that could actually be used once we introduce these courses, but it's not being done right now. And we have the same issues basically with continuous education, whereas I like and say I've seen a couple more courses being introduced year after year in continuous education in the public offer. So this is a change that's been done in the recent years. But we have really few opportunities for the training center to introduce these courses themselves because they have to follow a strict curriculum and it's also really heavy. So they have a lot of knowledge to cram into some theoretical and practical training. And it's really hard for them to decide which one to cut. Same thing for union training, since they don't have much union training. The only union that offers training currently is not offering training specific to green buildings, where even if they built their own school, which is a platinum LEED building. So there is this idea of thinking about it, of wanting to introduce it, of showing the students when they come for continuous education in their course, what are the options, when they can visit the school specifically with, renewable energies and all these new green construction options. But it's more of a show so they can watch it, so they can see it, but they're not actually trained on it. So we're going to see if it eventually evolves to train workers. But basically what we're saying in Quebec is the complete absence of climate literacy within all these different levels of training and by all these different actors that could actually, with the time, introduce these ideas. So what we've seen is that also from the respondents, a lot of people consider that as change is a normal part of construction, new materials evolve, new tools evolve, we're going to use something that we didn't before. And a lot of people seem to believe that this is just one of those changes. We're going to be able to just pick it up, read the manual instruction, and go on. But the thing is, what we're seeing is a big gap between what people are thinking about the way they can do it and research that's being done showing that this is not the way it works, that we require specific training, that we're going to have to develop new skills, as was presented earlier by my colleagues. So we have to work on these different things that we have to develop. So inter-trade communication, that we have to be able to get tighter units. You know, we have to be able to understand better what our trades are doing. So this is something that the training programs and pilot programs are doing right now. So this is going to be really interesting to see how the trades, since they don't perceive it as necessary, but we see that the data shows us that we actually have to get them to do the training. So we have this gap to fill in, basically, that we are working on. Other thing is that we have a stronger interest in the mechanical trades because they seem to be interested in seeing a lot of potential in these new areas and in these new jobs, and they have a strong skill development in the trades, and they're really investing on the skills development from the member as it is their added value compared to other unions. So this is something that we're really seeing a lot of interest in different places. Same thing for younger workers, have more interest in new technologies and products and are also more informed about climate change issues. And it was really brought up often by people saying, yeah, my children are always talking to me about it, so now I care about it. So it's really interesting to see how it came up in every interview. So we're seeing this really interesting change in how everyday life really seems to affect people in their work. So we have limitations on the other side, is the idea that there is a big lack of interest. They're reporting a lack of interest from a lot of members who don't want to get more specialized because they don't feel the need to do so because there is a labor shortage. So anyway, they get a job. So there is this context that really limits the interest of people to go further into the training because they already have so many options on their workplace and they don't necessarily want to have more responsibilities for a similar pay, whereas they can do something else really easily. Same thing is, as I said, the perceived difference between what they consider that they're confident in being able to do with, whereas the training is required. And then we have the idea of the prefabricated materials. That is something that we haven't talked a lot, but this is something that people are thinking about, the prefabricated buildings, how building trades are becoming more of IKEA builders and Lego builders, basically. So there is this big fear that these greener building will be made in beforehand in other non-union places and then will just be assembled. So we get a de-skilling of trades. And since the skill is the added value of trades, this is a big issue of taking the knowledge away from these trades. And then also getting the working condition lower because we see less skill, less development, less union, and therefore this could be a really slippery slope. So this is something that is really on their target. Same thing is the actual problem with the real quality of what is considered a green building. So we see this big gap within what we see as the official certification and what people are actually seeing on the work sites. They're seeing that they are on LEED buildings, but then what they're saying is we don't have enough inspection. We see a lot of gaps that shouldn't be there. We see a lot of low quality work. And we've seen here in Quebec in the news a lot of issues in the last 2 years because we've had this housing crisis and a lot of fast building. And even in regular non-green, eco-energical, eco-efficient buildings, we've seen these major issues, the major building issues and defects. So we can imagine how this is going to affect the environmental protection of the regular building. So this is really just compounding on all these elements. And of course, the low bidding principle that just goes for lower bidder all the time, whereas low carbon construction is a little more expensive at the beginning, but pays off in the long term. So basically, the VET programs were, criticized by all respondents. The lack of funding specifically is a big problem in Quebec. The really tight machine is really seen as something that could be used, but is actually right now holding back some people that would have the initiative, that would want to go farther because they're limited by this really tight ruling and process and program revision and rules. So what we're seeing is too general funding, inadequate courses, the few sustainable courses are labeled through a really random process. Basically, that's what was told to us, because the process is basically, oh, you believe that this could be related to sustainable building? Good, put a little tree on it. This is not exactly the most rigorous process. There really is some definitely improvement that can be done with this process. So this is something that definitely could be building on, and none of our respondents actually brought up those courses during the interviews. So clearly there's a big issue on marketing and informing the people and the trades about the existence of these courses. So this is another big issue of informing people of the resources that actually exist for continuous education, and to be able to introduce them in the regular initial training, since this is not being done right now, and upgrading much faster so we can introduce these new technologies and not be already behind when they get out, because it takes so much time. So here we find, I already told most of these information, and I know I'm probably short on time. So here what we found in Quebec, basically, is a really big machine, but a really rusty machine that is kind of stuck and could really, once we oil its gears, it could really go fast. That's the interesting potential that we have in Quebec, is we have this really big machine that could go forward really efficiently if we introduce more training and more agency for unions to represent the new skills required, and for employers to be able to share also the needs that they have on these new projects. But right now, what is being done is holding them back, and this big machine is just not being used. So we need to have more awareness of the different actors on the necessity of these different requirements, of these different skills, and making sure that people are able to actually improve these different programs and make it clearer to the workers that there can be a use for it, making clearer for the employers that having a better trained workforce is an improvement for their productivity and the rentability of their well-built business, and for unions to introduce these ideas. So what we're seeing is a system that is more similar to Europe in terms of social dialogue, in terms of actors involved, in terms of opportunities and rules that direct and make sure that we have union representation. But at the same time, we see a lower productivity, if we will, in the training literacy than other less legislated places like the United States, where some people, well, some unions who have the will to do some specific training have the space to do so, because there isn't this really tight environment. So we have to break through these barriers to make sure that we don't have the worst of the two cases, but we can use the best of two cases to get these improvement and get the trades in Quebec trained, now that we have the French programs with the CBTU. So this is something that we're going to be able to develop. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate.